Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about whether or not a mind-body approach will help you. And so I'll take you through all of the criteria that I use, that I've been taught through the multiple programs that I do in pain science. And I'll also give you a little bit of the background of the science of pain so that you can understand what it is that's going on in your body and you can start to address it for yourself. And so the first thing I want to talk about is whether or not this program is for you. I know you're here for a reason because you have pain and or you want to lose weight. And I really want to address this and make sure that you're in the right place so that you're not wasting your time. So you are in the right place if you're tired of visiting doctors and getting bounced around the medical system. A lot of people that I see have seen all kinds of doctors and specialists and have been referred all over the place, and still they feel like the medical system doesn't know what to do with them. So if that's you, you're in the right place. You're in the right place if you don't understand your symptoms and they're not quite following the patterns that your doctor describes. And so, an example of that would be that you have low back pain, but it's excruciating and it doesn't really match up with the way that your doctors are explaining your MRIs. Or an example might be that you have had surgery on a part of your body, but it's not getting better. Another reason that you may be here, and could be a good place for you, is if you're wanting to get off of medications. There are all kinds of medications that we end up on. And obviously, most people don't want to be living on medications for their entire life. And so, if that's you and you want to have a dietary lifestyle approach to reducing the medications that you're on, this is a good place for you. If you have been recommended surgery and you don't want to get it, you want to try some alternative methods before having to get surgery, this would be a good place for you. If your doctor has told you that you need to lose weight to reduce pain, then this is a great place for you. We'll look at whether or not pain science can be used to reduce pain, and then also we can get you on an anti-inflammatory diet, reducing inflammation, and also losing weight at the same time. If you know what you need to do, which is diet and exercise, but you feel stuck or you struggle with emotional eating or binge eating, if you feel like you try diet programs and then you always end up cheating or failing them, if you know you need to exercise, but you feel really exhausted right before you need to exercise, these are all signs that this would be a good program for you. If you feel like you should be happy and grateful, and you feel like your life is set up very well, but also you feel pretty empty and unhappy, this would also be a good place for you. I'll teach you why. And at the end of my group program, we do talk about how to improve your life. And then last, if your doctor has given you anxiety medication for a physical condition. So I know this happened to me. I went to the doctor for headaches and they tried to prescribe me an anxiety medication. And at the time, I was really hurt and confused, and I didn't understand how that was possible. You may have been referred to a psychologist or been given depression or anxiety medication for physical symptoms. Then this is a great place for you because that's a sign that your doctor thinks that this mind body work will help. And then I want to make sure too that I say exactly who this program is not for. So first of all, if you're not open to new ideas and new research, this is not a good place for you. This research that I am incorporating into this program has been newly developed. It is maybe 5 years old. A lot of it is not in our medical system yet. A lot of doctors don't know and understand this to the level that I do because it's just not taught in medical school. And what I find is that me and most of the practitioners that I know have experienced chronic pain and healed using these methods. And that's why we're doing it. So that's why I'm here. I healed myself from several chronic conditions, and that's my goal is to help other people do the exact same thing and live without pain. Another reason that you probably shouldn't be here, or I should say shouldn't be here yet, is if you have pain but you haven't seen a doctor. And so there are reasons that your doctor needs to see your body before you can start this program to rule out the really horrible things that could be going on, like tumors, infections, autoimmune conditions, any kind of nervous system problems, and then also severe arthritis or osteoarthritis. So those are all reasons that you should see a doctor to make sure that we're ruling out any of those conditions. Another reason that you probably shouldn't be here, or again, you shouldn't be here yet, is if you have a physical or mental illness that has not been managed by a doctor. Again, this is a another layer onto your medical care. It is not in place of medical care. And then if you're not willing to talk about your emotional health, then this isn't a great program for you. That is a lot of what I do is teach you how to link your mind and your mind and body both feel emotion. And that's a big part of this pain syndrome that I describe. It was a big part of my pain, and it's a big part of most of my clients' pain is understanding the emotional response in the body and how that can create symptoms and pain in your life. And then last, if you're not willing to make changes in your life, if you don't want to change your diet, if you don't want to start exercising, if you don't want to start doing daily practices to help support your nervous system, then this isn't the right program for you. And then I'll say that if you aren't sure, then feel free to just take this course and you'll know at the end of today, you'll know really clearly, I think, whether or not your condition is mind body. Another thing that you can do is talk to your doctor or talk to your psychologist. It doesn't hurt to have them know what you're doing. And then if you take this course and you're still not sure and you still have questions, please send me a message. Okay, so today we are talking about nervous system health, and this is the first piece of the puzzle when we look at holistic well-being. And I think it's really important that we all understand our nervous system and the way that it works. And I promise I won't get too scientific. I'll try to lay it out with lots of examples and make it really simple so that anyone can understand it. I think it's a really important way that we can find some agency and ownership over our health instead of relying on other people to do that for us. Your brain has one job, your nervous system has one job, and that is to keep you alive. It is survival based. And so when I say that, that means that your brain and your nervous system are always looking for negatives. They're always scanning your environment for problems and threats and trying to mitigate those as best as they can or prepare for those. And it does this by a two-way communication system. And so the messages go from your brain down to your body, but they also go from your body up to your brain. And what I think is really interesting is the part of the nervous system that is responsible for pain is mostly taking communication from the body and having it go up to the brain. And so what we're thinking in our cognitive mind is actually not having very much of an effect on this system because pain is subconscious. You're not thinking, oh, I wish I had pain, right? Your cognitive brain, your human brain can't change your pain levels. It's all subconscious. And when we look at the brain a little bit more closely, there's three parts of it. There's the brain stem, and that is where you have all of your reflexes. That's what reptiles have. It regulates your temperature and all of the main core things that your body needs to do to survive. And then next we have what's called the limbic system, and that's the part of the brain that was built over the brainstem, and that's responsible for emotion. And mammals have this. So reptiles don't have emotion, but mammals do. And part of the reason for that is that as mammals, we have social engagement. So we live in packs or tribes. And so a big part of that limbic system is reliant on the people that you're with. And so later on in the program, you'll see how your relationships can play into your pain levels. And within this limbic system, there are different branches. So you may be familiar with these branches. One is fight or flight. So those are feelings of anger and fear. The anger would prompt you to fight against an enemy or fight against an intruder. And then the fear would prompt you to run away. And then there's also another part of the nervous system called freeze. And if you've ever seen a possum in the wild, you know that's the freeze response. And so it's pretty much like playing dead. And as humans, we have that response as well. And what we find is that a lot of people with pain are kind of stuck. Their nervous system can be stuck in that fight or flight or that freeze response. And so part of this work is to bring you back into the rest and digest part of the nervous system, which is called the ventral vagal parasympathetic nervous system. And so again, when we look at the nervous system, it's very survival based. It's trying to do its best to keep you safe. And in that, there are different outputs of it, and the outputs can be pain and symptoms, and they can also be behaviors that the nervous system thinks is keeping you safe. So to change our pain patterns, we actually have to look at the inputs of the brain, because right now, if you're having pain or symptoms like headaches or fatigue, your brain is interpreting something as dangerous and then giving you that output as a way of communicating this danger that it's sensing. And I want to show you a few studies just so that you understand a little bit more deeply the way that the brain works. This image is from a study that was done that looked at social rejection and pain. And so it looked at people who had recently had a breakup and looked at the way that the feelings of rejection were in the brain using an MRI. And then they compared that to what would happen in the brain if you were to create some kind of pain stimulation. I think in this one, they were squeezing their arm or something like that. What you see in these images is that pain and social rejection light up the exact same places in the brain, the insula and the thalamus. And so when we look at pain, it helps us to know that pain and emotion are both stored and triggered by the same places of the brain. And so emotion can actually be one of the danger signals that create symptoms in our bodies. And then we have two other stories that I wanted to share. And these were told to me by the physician that trained me. His name is Howard Schubiner. And one is of a construction worker, and he stepped on a nail on the job site and immediately was in excruciating pain. He was rushed to the hospital and given all kinds of pain medications. And when the physicians took his boots off, what they found is that the nail had gone between his toes. And so his brain had used its system of predicting to create pain as a danger signal for this man so that he would go get medical attention. But he didn't actually have any physical injuries. And then the other story is about a Vietnam vet. And so he had a really, really severe injury to his leg in the war. There was shrapnel that got into his leg. It was very painful, and he healed from it. And then years later, 20 years later, he was in New York City and a helicopter went over and he got excruciating pain in his leg and he didn't understand what was going on. And then as the helicopter got closer, he had that memory of when his leg was damaged in the war. And so his pain was actually triggered by the sound of the helicopter. And so what we notice in certain pain situations is that triggers can be a huge part of pain. And we'll look at that a little bit more closely to see if you have certain triggers as well. And then last, I want to show you this finding. And in this study, they looked at the prevalence of degeneration in the spine in patients that did not have symptoms. And so there were 3,300 patients, none of them had any kind of pain. But what you find is that they all had some kind of degeneration. And so if you look at this, 37% of 20-year-olds have degeneration, and up to 96% of 80-year-olds have degeneration. That doesn't mean, though, that they all have pain. And so in this case, none of these patients had pain. And what that shows us is back pain is not correlated with MRI findings. And so when we look at these different degenerative changes in our body, in our joints, in our spine, they're normal parts of aging. And so the physician who trained me, he calls them gray hairs of the spine. It just because they're gray hairs does not mean that there have to be pain. So it's a simple sign of aging, not necessarily a sign that pain should be present in the body. And so as we move deeper into pain, I want to make sure that this is really clear. All pain is real. There is no real pain versus imaginary pain. All pain is real. So if someone has pain, even if they don't have a physical finding, it does not mean that the pain isn't real. It can be exactly the same as someone who has damage in the joint. And we know this because all pain is in the brain. And so our body is always communicating signals up to the brain. And the brain is interpreting those signals from the body and deciding whether or not it should add pain. So if you think about the man with the construction boot and the nail that went through it, his brain created pain as a warning sign, but there was no damage in the foot. And so that can happen in any body. It's part of our humanness. And if this is you, there's absolutely nothing wrong. It's just a miscommunication and it can be fixed. And so pain can be a result of tissue damage, but pain can also be a result of neural circuits. And that for me was life-changing because I had pain in my back and I thought there was damage and doctors had found damage. But what I found out is that it was actually a neural circuit creating the pain, which meant that I could unlearn that neural circuit and heal from my pain without having to have any kind of intervention. So it completely changed my life. So earlier I mentioned that there are inputs and outputs. And if you look at the top of this image, you can see that stress and injury are inputs to the nervous system, to the brain. And the brain, like I said, it's always looking for danger signals. That's what it runs off of. Is am I safe? That's what it needs to know. Am I safe? How do I create safety in every moment? And when you have an injury, then the brain will create pain and symptoms. So an injury is communicated from the body into the brain, and then the output would then be pain and symptoms. But what you also see is that stress can create danger signals. And so, if you have increased stress, then you can also increase the danger in the brain. And then from that, the brain will put pain and symptoms as an output of the nervous system. If you look at the left of this chart, you'll see sensitization, which say that 10 times fast. But these include different situations like childhood abuse or neglect, trauma, past injuries, feeling stuck, and avoiding emotion. So, if any of these relate to you, what happens is that the brain becomes more sensitive to stress and injury. If you look at the research, you would see that someone who's had some kind of childhood abuse or trauma, they're much more likely to experience chronic pain. And this is why, because the nervous system has been primed to always be looking for danger in a different way than someone who's not experienced that. And then if we just look at that lower part of the graph, we have pain and symptoms. So that's an output of the nervous system. And if you're able to calmly say, okay, it's okay, I'm safe, nothing has gone wrong, then there's not an additional danger loop going on. But most people, when they start to experience pain or symptoms, they find fear and frustration. They become hypervigilant and start trying to figure out how their pain is there. And all of that fear and worry and anxiety and frustration is then communicated back up to the brain, giving more danger signals. And so when we look at pain science, then we would see that there's what's called a pain fear cycle. And that's this bottom part. From the brain, we have pain and symptoms. Those pain and symptoms create fear, anxiety, and frustration. That danger is communicated back up to the brain. And once the brain feels that increased danger, it increases the pain and symptoms. And that's how you can end up in this vicious loop of chronic pain. And next, I want to explain how your nervous system speaks because it can't speak in English. This is a subconscious part of our brain. The part of our brain that is in control of language is the prefrontal cortex, and it is not involved in this subconscious processing for pain. And so our nervous system speaks to us through these different places. It speaks as pain, which again, all pain is in the brain. The nervous system speaks by changing blood flow and muscle tension. You might notice that your heart beats faster when you're feeling pain. You might notice that your muscles get tight. A lot of people have tension in their shoulders. Those are all communications of the nervous system. And yes, you can stretch and get adjustments and massages, and all of that can help relieve some of that tension. But what happens when you're in this fight or flight response is that the nervous system just puts it right back. So, what we have to do is learn how to get ourselves out of that fight or flight response. And then you don't need these modalities that help you to get out of it. Your nervous system is in control of your immunity, and stress can increase or decrease your immune response. And so, when you go into a fight or flight response, let's say you were being attacked, your body will increase immunity as a way to protect you because it's preparing you to get injured. And with that increased immunity, you can fight infection. But what happens when you're in a chronic stress response is that the immunity goes up, and sometimes it has nowhere to go. And so it starts attacking the safe parts of the body and creates an autoimmune disease. Or it can also go up, and then after a period of time, it kind of fizzles out and runs out of resources, and then it gets depressed and you'll get sick more often. Your nervous system changes your digestion, and so the speed of digestion and the blood flow to the organs is all controlled by the nervous system. And when you're in the rest and digest state, your body is able to process food in the way that is natural and healthy. But when you're in a stress response, the speed and the way that your body is able to manage digestion changes. And that's why IBS is a mind body syndrome. Your nervous system changes your weight. And so, weight isn't just calories in and calories out. Hormones are a huge part of the energy balance. Your nervous system is responsible for inflammation. And again, inflammation is a part of that stress response. And so, it can be affected by the amount of stress in your body, but it can also be affected by things like what you eat and the environmental things that you expose yourself to and movement. And those are all things that we address later in this course. Our nervous system speaks as behaviors, and oftentimes these are the behaviors that we don't like about ourselves, the times that we feel out of control. In this course, we talk a lot about emotional eating, overeating, binge eating, eating things that you know are bad. But this also can include substance abuse, and it also can include procrastination. But these are all ways that the nervous system is communicating danger to us. And really, if we address the emotional roots of it, then we can move away from the behaviors a lot more easily than trying to fight through them using willpower and discipline. And then other symptoms, we talked about pain, but there's also fatigue, depression, anxiety, fibromyalgia, chronic low back pain, neck pain, tension headaches, migraines, and really the medically unexplained. When you have symptoms that the doctors really don't understand and they've ruled out all of the horrible things that can happen, this is oftentimes the best place to look. So next, I wanted to just show you a quick list of some of the most common mind-body symptoms. And I won't read these to you. I'll let you look over them and decide whether or not yours fit. But I do want to mention that oftentimes, if you have one of these, you might have multiple. So I'll share my mind body symptoms. And like I said, they've kind of come and gone. A lot of times you'll notice that what you had as a younger kid, it might change over time. I used to have stomach aches a lot as a kid, and then I would have headaches as a teenager and in my 20s. And then from there, I would get low back pain and neck pain. And then after my pregnancies, I had urinary problems. And I also get like an itchiness on my arms. And I'll also go through periods of brain fog and fatigue, anxiety, and depression. And I say this, and I want to just make sure that I acknowledge that this is all human. We all go through periods of anxiety and depression. And part of what can help you get out of it is the ability to not be afraid of those body sensations. And that's what this program teaches you to do. And then researchers have also found that there are certain personality traits that are common for mind body symptoms. And those can be perfectionism, having low self esteem, being introverted or shy or cautious, harboring rage or resentment, not standing up for yourself or being able to say your true feelings, being a people pleaser and going out of your way to help other people before yourself, being a worrier, having high expectations of yourself, wanting to be good or liked or wanting to fit in, frequently feeling guilty, being hard on yourself, being overly responsible, having a hard time making decisions, being a rule follower, holding your thoughts and feelings in, or also being someone who likes to avoid conflict. And then there are also what are called the fit criteria, and these are certain ways that you can know whether or not your pain is mind body. And so the first thing, this is the functional piece of it, is that your symptoms can't be fully explained by structural evidence. And so symptoms begin without a physical cause, meaning you didn't have an injury. There's really no physical cause that explains why the pain suddenly started. Symptoms can continue after an injury has healed. Most injuries will heal within 3 to 6 months. Symptoms that are symmetrical or in the same on both sides of the body. So oftentimes, like if you have, let's say you have knee pain, it would only be on one side of the body. But if you had the exact same pain in both knees, that's a sign that it could be mind body. Symptoms occur on one half of the body, can be from head to toe or in just a region of the body. Symptoms spread over time to different areas of the body. So I've explained how I have different symptoms that pop up and kind of come in and out, and my response to those is a huge part of whether or not they become chronic. Symptoms can radiate to opposite sides of the body or down an arm or leg, or symptoms can have the quality of tingling, electric, hot, or cold. And then the next piece of this is that symptoms are inconsistent, meaning they come and they go. So they can shift from one location in the body to another. They get more or less intense depending on the timing of the day. A lot of my clients will have intense symptoms either in the morning or at night. That's pretty common. Symptoms occur after you exercise or do an activity and not during it. This is another really common one. So if you were to break your leg, then it would hurt with every step. And so a sign of mind body symptoms would be that you're able to go exercise, but then an hour or two later, that's when the symptoms start coming up. Symptoms occur when stress increases or when you imagine a stressful situation. Symptoms are minimal or not existent when on vacation or doing joyful activities. And so this is another common thing is if you can go on vacation and walk 5 miles without pain, and then at home you can't walk a mile because you have pain, this is a sign that it would be a mind-body condition. If your symptoms are minimal or non-existent when you get a massage or other therapies like acupuncture, herbal treatments, or vitamin treatment, this is another sign. And we know that massage or acupuncture, it doesn't change the structure of the body. It changes the muscle tension and it also changes the nervous system response. And so what we teach you to do in this program is to use your own brain to change those instead of going to get therapies. And then last, symptoms can occur when you think about them or when someone asks you about them. And then this is the last piece of the fit criteria, and that is that symptoms can be triggered. So symptoms are brought on by certain situations. Symptoms are triggered by things that aren't related. And so that example of a man whose leg pain was triggered by the sound of a helicopter, that's a sign of a trigger. And we see this all of the time. Smells, sounds, sitting at the computer, sitting in a hard chair, changes to the weather, or specific movements, even like bending over, sitting or standing or sneezing. My sneeze was one of the reasons that I knew my low back pain was mind body, because if I were to imagine that I was about to sneeze, I would get really intense pain in my back. And that was a sign that my nervous system was creating that pain. And then last, symptoms can be triggered by just imagining that you're doing the activity. And then the next thing that we find is that certain situations are often the trigger or the beginning of when pain started. And so I'll let you read through this list. And there's also a download. If you look down below this video, there's downloads. One of them is the fit criteria. One, it looks at these triggers and certain defenses that you may have when you look at your pain. And so feel free to print those and circle the ones that fit your specific situation. And that will really help you to understand whether or not your pain is fitting the pieces of the puzzle for mind body syndromes. But these are all certain examples. And for me, the way that I really knew that my pain was mind body, I had just lost my mom to cancer. And it was a very, very stressful time in my life. I had just had a baby. And so I had a 2-month-old baby, and then I helped my mom through a year of chemotherapy and radiation and a huge surgery. And then we all thought that her cancer was gone after the surgery. And when I took her to her follow-up visit, we found out that it had spread everywhere in her body. And so not only did I go through all of that stress, but then after I lost her, I had 3 little kids. So if you're a mom of 3 kids, or if you can imagine being a mom of 3 kids, you would know that it is really hard to grieve when you're with 3 tiny little people all day. You can't just cry. You can't be in that state and still be a mother. And so I repressed a lot of that emotion, and it came up in the form of a lot of different symptoms. And so looking at these triggers was a big piece of how I knew that my pain was my body. One thing that you can do is create a pain timeline. And you really want to answer this question is, do your symptoms coordinate with stressful periods of time in your life? And what you'll find, what we see often, is that you'll have an injury many years ago, and then during stressful times in your life, that pain can come back. It usually happens right during that stressful time or immediately after. And what this tells you is that your nervous system is trying to protect you from stress and from emotional pain, and it's using physical pain to do that. And so instead of grieving my mom, my nervous system gave me pain, and that gave me something else to focus on instead of the grief. And so there's always someone who asks me, what if? And these are the most common what ifs that I get. So one is, what if I don't feel stressed? And that's a really good question. But oftentimes, if you feel pain and you don't feel stress, the pain is the stress. So your body, or that symptom, I should say, the symptom is the stress. And so instead of feeling stress, you might be feeling fatigue, you might have a headache, you might have pain. And so it's really common that you don't feel the emotional response because you have pain. Um, Another thing, what if I don't want to talk about it? And I hear this a lot. A lot of people don't want to talk about it. And I was someone who didn't really want to go to a psychologist to figure this out. Once I learned about it, I felt really confident that I could do it myself and that I could have the resources that I needed to process through the emotion without help. And you don't have to talk about it. I think it's really important to know that you don't have to talk to anyone about what you're feeling to get out of pain. You can journal about it, which the next module will teach you about journaling. And the other thing that I do in my coaching is I do somatic practice. And so instead of going in and reliving the experience, we can use the body and see how that feels in the body and create a new emotional memory around it. So that way you're not having to relive trauma. Another thing that I hear all of the time is, I'm afraid of feeling my emotions. People are afraid that if they go in, they can't come back out. And I understand that fear. And I want you to know that your body is meant to feel emotion. That is the way that your body was designed. It is human. A lot of us were taught as children that we shouldn't feel emotion, that we shouldn't feel sad or mad, especially if you're a woman, you shouldn't feel mad. If you're a man, you shouldn't feel sad. But these emotions are really important. And if you don't express them, then they can create pain and symptoms in the body. And so I encourage you to even just dip your toe into noticing what those emotions feel like in your body. What if I think my body is damaged? So there are a lot of people who do this work that do have damage in the tissues, and there are a lot of people that do have spinal fusions, or they've gotten surgeries, or they have chronic autoimmune diseases that have created a lot of fatigue. And I want to acknowledge that there is structural damage, but there's also the nervous system response to that damage. And so if you notice that you have a lot of fear and frustration about your condition, even if it is a very real chronic condition, then working through that fear and frustration can help reduce the symptoms and make them more manageable. And then last, what if I have chronic fatigue? Fatigue is one of the symptoms that we can work with using this model. Okay, so thank you for sticking along, and I hope that after seeing this video, you have a much clearer idea of whether or not your pain is mind-body and whether or not this course can help you. The next module is how to do the work, and I will take you in the first steps towards unlearning your pain and symptoms. And then from there, we'll get into digestive health and muscular health. So hope you have a great day, and I will see you again soon.